Hello everybody and greetings from Varjo HQ and welcome to Varjo Live. Today we have special guests with us here at Varjo HQ. We're joined by MachineMD and we're going to be discussing how eye tracking can be leveraged for brain health and human performance. We have a great lineup today. We're going to be first, we have Dominic Sen, the CEO of MachineMD, introducing MachineMD and speaking on the future of Oculomics. Then we have Bruno Hauser joining from Switzerland, speaking on the future of brain screening, coming from swinging flashlights and bringing things to the data-driven age, using data-driven insights in brain screening. Next up, we'll have an interview with Dominic Brugger, the CTO of MachineMD, speaking with Patrick Wyatt from Varjo on how to use this information in simulation training. And then finally at the end, we'll have a live Q&A with all of the panelists, and we're also bringing in Alexi, our lead computer vision engineer, to speak and answer any questions you might have about Varjo eye tracking, MachineMD, the applications in practice. With that, let's get things going. We'll have Dominic starting first, speaking about the future of Oculomics.
Hi everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here at Varjo HQ today. I flew in this morning from Bern, Switzerland, where we are based as MachineMD. MachineMD is a medtech company coming out of the University Clinic in Bern. We started our business about 5 years ago, but it's based on many years of research that was done at the University Clinic in Bern. Our goal is to bring neurodiagnostics to the next stage, to make it much more accessible than it is today. And the reason why that's important, and the reason also why that's a project where all of the team at MachineMD is really investing a lot of dedication and passion into it, is because neurological diseases, they are, I would say, could be labeled as an epidemic. About 43% of all people worldwide suffer from a neurological disorder. If we look at today's diagnostic possibilities, they are expensive, they are not accessible for many people. So the most important one may be being scans of the brain, like MRI scans or CT scans. There are about 7 billion people worldwide that don't have access to an MRI machine. Also in the UK, on average, you wait like 3 years to actually get an MRI if it's not super urgent. We will change that with a medical device that we have developed over the last years. We call it NEOS. It offers a very fast and non-invasive way to look if the brain is working as it's supposed to work. We do that by looking at how the eyes and pupils react to certain visual stimuli that we give into the eye. And based on the reactions of the eyes, we can tell a lot about the brain and whether or not there is any disorder present in some areas of the brain. If we look at today, a patient having a brain disorder, many of those, they go from one doctor to the next doctor, they get misdiagnosed along the pathway, and oftentimes it takes like 3 months, 6 months until they have a final diagnosis. If someone has a mild stroke, that might be too late because then he could get a full stroke in this time. If someone has a brain tumor, it could also be too late to have then an effective treatment. So our goal is to speed this up with our medical device that is now certified for the whole European market and also certified for the US market. I'd like to show you a short video where you see how NEOS is introduced and used in one clinic, which is an interesting case because it's a fully remote ophthalmic clinic run by one of our co-founders, Dr. Matthias Abeck. He's the clinician and kind of the clinical father at MachineMD. So please have a look at the video and I'll be back in a minute or two.
Ebis is the world's first teleophthalmic practice to offer a standardized, complete, instrument-based eye exam. For the first time, it includes a comprehensive, automated neuroophthalmic examination enabled by NEOS, the world's first neuroophthalmoscope, developed by MachineMD. The people behind Ebis are neuroophthalmologist Dr. Matthias Abeck, ophthalmologist Dr. Sven Hirsch-Hoffmann, and general practitioner Dr. Markus Abeck. With Ebis, they showed that a very efficient, high-quality examination of eye structure and function can be performed by a medical assistant or optician.
NEOS is a fundamental part of our examination because what we do is a complete instrumental eye exam, and we can't do a complete eye exam without NEOS because NEOS is that part of the eye exam that is from the brain. In all those cases where you have unspecific symptoms, how can you know that it's not a problem that is based in the brain and not in the eye if you don't have NEOS? So NEOS is actually a very important part of our examination.
I'm an ophthalmologist, and as such, I'm not only responsible for the eye itself, but for the entire visual system, which involves much of the brain. Including eye movements and pupil movements. So whenever a patient has a visual problem, it might have its origin somewhere in the brain, and we need to find out. And that's what I learned from a NEOS exam.
So the reason why eyes and pupils are or provide a lot of information about brain health is, as Matthias just laid out, because a lot of the brain actually is involved in processing visual signals. So everything that comes from the eyes to the visual cortex at the back of your head, but then also all the brain nerves and brain regions responsible for actually steering the eyes so that we can follow objects, that we can keep objects focused, steadily focused, and also the change of the pupil sizes. So there are all kinds of different muscles and nerves involved, and they go all through the brain, from the eyes back to the head, and through different nerves back to the eyes. So you can imagine a NEOS exam is a bit like an end-to-end software test. So you know exactly if you give in a certain stimuli what you need to get as a response, and if you don't get the response, you can also track back where in the brain actually part is not, or some functions in the brains or nerves in the brains are not working as they're supposed to work. We can't tell why they're not working as they're supposed to work. For this, further exams on the clinical side are needed, but we know that a patient that has functional deficits needs to go see a neurologist and get those further exams. So if we look at the landscape that we have today in neurodiagnostics, we intend to radically change that with our medical device. So we want to bring examination time down to about 3 minutes. Today, to do these type of exams manually, that's how they're done in the clinic today, can take up to 40, 50 minutes. It's much, much cheaper, it's much simpler, it needs less room, it's more convenient compared to whatever device you use for imaging the brain. And it also reduces the misdiagnosis rate significantly compared to the fully subjective way of measuring eye and pupil movements today, because you have to imagine if you go to an ophthalmologist or an optometrist or a neurologist and he wants to make sure that, for example, your fast eye movements are okay, he's doing like this, look at this finger, look at that finger, and then observes how your eyes are moving. So there's a lot of subjectivity in there, and there's also a lot of misdiagnosed patients. We have built our solution on the hardware side, the eye tracking side, on the Varjo headset. We have chosen this solution and Varjo as a partner because they offer, from our perspective, the best eye tracking that is out there in a VR format. And for us, the quality of the raw eye tracking data, that's like the basis on which we base all the further processing of our clinical algorithms. It's also important for us that the eye tracker is fast, so we can't operate with an eye tracker that you typically find in a VR headset that runs at 60 Hertz or 90 Hertz, because then the estimation for how the eyes are actually moving, they are simply not specific or not precise enough. So that's why we've been really successfully collaborating and very closely with Varjo over the last 3 years to get the first fully certified medical device that is based on a VR hardware out in the market. Today, what we are doing with NEOS is we are enabling technicians to do an exam that today needs a specialist to get it done properly. So ideally, if you have a problem today with your eye functions and the neurological functions behind it, you can go and see a clinical specialist. They are called neuro-ophthalmologists. But there are just about 800 of those. I think there are 2 in Africa right now. So it's hard to get access to those. With NEOS, you get at least the same quality of the exam with a device. It can be operated by a technical assistant. There is no need for a physician to be present. So it really lowers the bar of people getting this type of diagnostics, which can inform then the further patient pathway and the further exams that are needed. Our goal moving forward, and that's what I would like to show with this slide here, is not just to measure single brain functions, but really develop clinical validated algorithms that can detect certain pathology at a much earlier stage than they can be detected today. This is especially relevant for multiple sclerosis. That's also relevant for Parkinson. That's relevant for Alzheimer's and for many, many rare diseases where it's sometimes super important to capture them at an early stage, because typically if there is damage to the brain, the damage can't be reverted back, so that's irreversible. So the earlier you capture it, the earlier you can treat it, the better off a patient will be. With that, I'd like to hand over to Bruno. He's based also at MachineMD in Bern. He's joining from Bern. Bruno is our head of analytics, so he's the guy developing all the algorithmic processing pipeline that we need and all the statistics and algorithmic development that we need to get the algorithms we're developing certified, which is a super high standard to get that through FDA, or in the European market to get that through a notified body and being compliant with the European medical regulations. With that, I'd like to hand over to you, Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. So now that you got a rough idea what we at MachineMD are doing, and I'm sure most of you have probably quite a good idea of what Varjo is doing, I would like to use the next few minutes to give you a more concrete idea of what our device NEOS is doing technically. And for that, I will introduce you to one of our biomarkers. So in the next few minutes, you will therefore learn what RAPD is, what a swinging flashlight has to do with that, and how NEOS gives us a digitalized version of it, the RAPD Neo score. Maybe none of you have heard about RAPD before, but have no fear, this is one of our simple biomarkers, and I promise you that there will be no mathematical formulas in the slides I'm going to show you. So what is this RAPD? RAPD stands for relative afferent pupillary defect. Maybe if you could switch the slide exactly. And maybe you ask yourself, what does afferent mean? Afferent neurons are the nerve fibers which are responsible for bringing sensory information from the outside world into the brain. And classically, to detect such a relative afferent pupillary defect in a classical examination, a neuro-ophthalmologist uses a flashlight and shines a beam of light alternatingly to each eye of a person. You can see a visualization of the procedure on the images on the left. So while shining light in the eye, the examiner observes the size of the pupil for each eye. And maybe you have seen this in a movie or a series or so, where a doctor takes out his flashlight and shines the light into the eyes and checks for the pupil sizes. First one eye and then the other, and he repeats that. Now, maybe you can see it already in the images, but the doctor needs to be very careful and check for very subtle differences in pupil reaction. If there is a difference in pupil reaction, this could indicate that there might be a possible optic nerve disorder. So basically, the examination is about detecting whether there is a difference in pupil reaction from one eye to the other. That sounds very easy, but doing this manually comes with a set of caveats. What kind of pupil reaction difference makes up a rating from mild to moderate? And these buckets, mild and moderate, they are aggregated values which make it quite hard to track subtle degradations over time. And maybe even if the doctors had the same professor, still one doctor might assign a rating of 1 or 2 and another 4 for the exact same subject. Some might use a flashlight which is brighter than the other one he used for other patients. And ambient lighting is critical. This can change over multiple examinations and for different subjects. How do you make sure it's always the same? And so on and so forth. So you see there's quite some limitations that go with this classical approach. And there's quite some room for improvement. How can this be done in a better way? In NEOS, our device, we simulate a swinging flashlight by alternately illuminating each eye with a bright stimuli and record the pupil size. You can see such an example video stream if you look very closely to it, that the pupils react to the stimuli while wearing the Varjo headset. And if you watch very closely, you might see abrupt constrictions, then a slow dilation, and then constriction again, and repeat and repeat and repeat. And this is exactly the same pattern as we have seen previously on the previous slide with the visualization. So again, what our device does instead of providing a flashlight is that it displays a bright stimuli to the person wearing the headset, and we record the respective pupil size data. You can see a plot of such repetitions. So on the y-axis, you see the pupil size, and on the x-axis, you see time. So there's many repetitions. In the beginning, you see that the pupil size gets bigger, then it goes down, it constricts, and starts to adapt again, and then dilates again. And these traces of the pupil size over time are the base information that we use to deduct whether an RAPD could be present or not. Now you can imagine looking at these maybe complicated data traces that there must be quite some data processing going on when we work with these values. You can think of all the bells and whistles that you might know from signal processing, such as cleaning, blinking, filtering, noise estimation, air propagation, Monte Carlo sampling, and statistical modeling. This might sound complicated, but basically it boils down to just a smart comparison of pupil amplitudes and its aggregation to a score that we call NEOS score. And you can see on the bottom, the score transparently represents the compressed information of the traces above into a single score accompanied with uncertainty. Having just a single score allows for fast interpretation and comparison. But let's switch to the next slide and take a closer look of such a RAPD NEOS score. On top, you can see a bigger visualization of such a RAPD NEOS score. And looking at the plot, there are two important pieces of information that jump into the eye. So there's a black dot at roughly minus 45, and there are the orange bars. Now, the orange bars visualize the range of RAPD NEOS scores you would expect in a healthy population, because we produced these numbers by computing the RAPD NEOS score for all of our subjects in a normative database. Currently, we have around 160 healthy subjects in the database, and this number is still increasing. The percentile of this distribution is a score that allows the reader to compare it with an individual score. Here, the minus 45. And the concrete judgment here then would be with a very high probability, this score lies around outside of the normative range you would expect a healthy subject would have. So you could say that there is probably an RAPD present. By the way, just a side note, the measurement you see here on this slide, the minus 45 is actually the NEOS score of the pupil constricting and dilating. Maybe you've seen on the slide before. So there was quite a subtle change, and this is just to visualize that it's quite hard to detect such an RAPD, and just imagine doing that subjectively using a manual swinging flashlight test. But now, having this value at minus 45, how certain can we be that an expert would also have come up with the same conclusion? So clinical validation is the keyword here. To check that, we took advantage of a clinical cohort, so another data set of 165 subjects, which did the whole NEOS examination, and of which 40 were rated as having an RAPD present, judged by an expert. Now, what we did is that we compared the judgments of our RAPD score with that data, and this gave us an area under the curve of 8.2, and that indicates quite good discriminative power. Okay, so these were quite some concepts, but let's take a step back. Remember that we've seen a swinging flashlight examination, how this is being done in a classic way by shining light into the one eye and then the other eye repeatedly. We have seen how this can be digitalized using the Varjo headset, and how this subjective measure can be transformed into a single numeric value that is precise, robust, repeatable, and its transparency is improved. So, as I've promised, there were no formulas on the slide, but if any of you were interested in getting a closer look at the details of our RAPD NEOS score, I invite you to feel free to have a look of one of our publications we did in that field. These are referenced on the slide at the bottom, or just ask a question later in the Q&A. With that, I conclude talking about the example use case for a biomarker for our NEOS device. And let's see what other possibilities there are that such a headset might offer for the future. And with that, I would like to hand over back to Varjo HQ.
So hello, my name is Patrick Wyatt, I'm Varjo's Chief Product Officer, and we've seen how eye tracking is transforming medical diagnostics, and we'll talk now for a while about how eye tracking can transform a different use case entirely. So we work a lot in pilot training at Varjo, both civil and military training, and what we're seeing is applications here for eye tracking in that space as well. Oops. So I think it would be very important that you could measure in pilot training use cases objective outcomes. Much pilot training right now is quite task-based, looking through procedures and checklists. But what if you could actually measure what's happening? Imagine if you could see whether pilots were looking at the right information, the right screen, the right dials during their training. Imagine if you can measure their cognitive load overall. Well, I'm joined here now with Dominic Burger to talk about this. It's quite a new area, really, in general, pilot training, eye tracking overall, but we'll discuss some of the topics linked to that. Dominic, what made you think that you could apply the same core technologies that you've used for medical diagnostics to this space as well of pilot training?
Like the fundamental of what we do at MachineMD is our analytics pipeline, which is multi-layered and is to extract all relevant features from the eye tracking. It starts with measuring the eyes, which we get a super good feed from Varjo. Out of these, we then extract the basic features such as pupil dynamics, saccade fixation, saccades, and everything. And the exact same markers are also the basis on which you can build up some cognitive insight.
Interesting. And what particular metrics do you use for those measuring those use cases?
For these use cases, we have prepared a slide to give you a quick overview of the most important metrics in cognitive load assessment. So the first one, and I think to that one everyone can relate, are pupil size and dynamics. Imagine you are scaring someone. He's just standing in front of you with wide open eyes and the pupils getting huge. So this one gives you insight into emotional arousal and also the cognitive workload. In the example I gave of someone scared, completely overloaded. I don't know, what shall I do? And then we are having markers such as fixation duration and frequency. This means like, where is a person looking for how long? Give you insight into the depth of the processing, attention allocation, and task engagement. Then we are having blink rate and latency, gives you some insight into effort, cognitive load, and fatigue level. Everyone knows also blink rate is monitored in most modern cars to give you an insight whether you should take a break or you're still fit to drive. And then we are having saccadic patterns, giving insight into the visual search strategy, which then in turn gives you insight into the allocation of your attention and stress-induced scanning and task focus.
Oh, very interesting. And how accurate do you think the metrics are compared to other techniques, let's say, like neuroimaging or EEG?
So let's divide this question into two parts. So first, how accurate can we be? I think there we are highly influenced by the surrounding conditions. And I think exactly that's a part where a virtual reality headset and the simulation in virtual reality offers many advantages because we can have complete control of all the surrounding conditions. I mentioned earlier that the pupil size is one of the important markers. So that means we need to be able to distinguish, is it the pupil reaction due to stress and attention, or is it the pupil reaction due to lightning changes, which also makes you change your pupil.
I see, so you can control better that kind of thing in VR because as opposed to, say, a dome where the lighting is kind of unpredictable,
in VR know exactly what you're showing somebody in that case.
Exactly, that's the first part of the equation, and I think that's why we should use VR to build up such simulation. The second part of the question you asked, Pri, was how does these markers based on a movement and pupil reaction compare to other markers of stress and things such as on EEG? Of course, each signal you are adding will bring you more information. But on the other hand, we really need to discuss about the feasibility of such tests. When we are doing high-density EEG, then you can have a setup and preparation time just to place all those electrodes on your skin or on your scalp of up to an hour. And I'm not an expert in those simulations, but I really imagine that doesn't fit into the workflow.
I see. So it's not so practical even in some ways. Those kind of things. That makes sense as well. Very good. Very good. So do you think these metrics we've seen here overall, could they in the end be boiled down to one overall like mega metric, some kind of measure of stress or fatigue that we could, let's say, surface one day in Varjo base as a single blinking number? Could it be that easy?
I would argue against. I think we should not go down to this road and aggregate everything into one number for attention or stress or what we want to do, because all these numbers will be highly task dependent. So we need to distinguish, like, are we allocating attention to the correct spot in the cockpit of what's going on in the simulation or not? And that's why we really need to tightly integrate the measurement and analysis of all these markers with the task design of the simulation.
I see. So being able to see what the stimuli we're looking at in that moment are and link that back to the reaction is very important in those cases as well.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Great. Well, thank you, Dominic, for those questions. We can hand back now to the next part of our program, which is the live Q&A session. We'll just get everyone arranged here on the floor of the atrium. In the meantime, you can add your questions here on the link on the screen, which is slido.com #VarjoLive, and we're back with you in 1 second.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you so much, Dominic. Let's get settled on the couch. We're bringing in the full group of panelists here. So everybody you've been speaking to so far is now available for any questions you may have. Please use that Slido link that Patrick just mentioned. So slido.com #VarjoLive, and please start firing away. There's one person here on the couch who hasn't spoken so far. So Alexi is our lead computer vision engineer, obviously focused on anything eye tracking. Alexi, do you want to introduce yourself real quick here as well?
Yes, sure. Hello, the audience. I'm Alexi. I'm lead computer vision engineer at Varjo eye tracking team. I've been working on eye tracking for all Varjo headset generations. Currently working with my team on XR4 eye tracking. So yeah, we'll be glad to answer all your questions.
So you can get as technical as you'd like, basically, or as broad as you'd like. Please throw in any questions. We'll get the ball rolling. We have a bunch already here. I think coming off of your discussion here about different applications, maybe for you, Dominic, why would a company focused on the medical space be a capable partner in training and simulation?
I think that's mainly the case because as a medical company, we are super highly regulated. The standards when it comes to being sure that the information we are providing out of whatever we're doing is actually accurate, precise, and has been fully validated in the right setting. There are a lot of standards and norms we need to comply to, and it's also fully checked then either by the FDA or a notified body. So if you look at the partner that can provide quality work that is kind of medical grade, clinical grade, I think it makes a lot of sense to do that with a company like MachineMD or another company in the medical space. Because, as I said, quality assurance, that's like one of the main topics, and we're investing a lot into it.
You touched on that. There's another question here around regulation. Could you kind of walk through a bit more of what is the regulatory scene? What does that process look like to have one of these in actual patient work?
Yeah, that's a big topic for every medical device manufacturer, as we are at MachineMD. So basically there are different risk class. So if you have like, I don't know, something in like an implant or so, then you're in the highest risk class. That's class 3 it's called, and then you have class 2, which is kind of a middle ground, and then class 1. So class 1, you can say kind of self-certify yourself and say, hey, I'm compliant with everyone, and then the authorities might come and check, and eventually they do so over time. That's okay if you provide something that is basically super low risk to patients now. We are a class 2 device, our medical system based on the Varjo headset. That means that it needs to get certified by a notified body in Europe and also by the FDA in the US to make sure that actually everything that we've done and the data we're basing ourselves on and the information we're providing to clinicians then, that these are fully validated accurately and precise. And that makes a lot of sense. It makes our life super cumbersome from time to time because you spend a lot of time on documentation and really making sure that what you're doing is exactly the right thing to do. And it's also a lengthy process when it comes to actually getting the certification. So you have to submit like the full documentation of your solution. You have to do usability testing. So that's also a big aspect of it to make sure people actually know how to use it. They don't make any errors when they're using a certain solution. So that's a huge topic, and I think it's a beneficial one at the end of the day because it forces one from day one on to have like risk and patient safety and quality of the solution on the top of everything you're doing.
Which is, it's obviously a good thing that there are all those mechanisms in place. Great to hear. Okay, we have one from Christopher asking, and maybe this is for you, Dominic, have you heard of the approach of using RAPD in the context of PTSD desensitization?
No, I haven't heard of this, and maybe there may also be a misunderstanding on this because the RAPD, it's really a measurement of unilateral nerve damage. So for me, it's a bit hard to see how this could relate to PTSD desensitization.
But maybe I can add there something to it. I mean, pupil reaction in the context of measuring PTSD to see not is this pupil reacting different from this one? That's what RAPD is doing now, to see is there a damage on this side or that side of the optic nerve. But in general, to look at the pupil in the context of PTSD, that's a very promising approach.
I believe this one would be for Oleksiy, you. How does the fact that the virtual scenes presented by the headset will be at a fixed virtual distance determined by the headset optical design, how would that affect the result of these metrics? In other words, do these metrics vary with accommodation?
Yeah, so indeed there is this fact in the optical design of most of the currently present virtual reality headsets in the market, that we have a fixed focal plane distance, as we always have the display at a fixed distance from the eye. But basically we are using the stereo disparity to create this immersion. So with certain users, it's known that this might create a conflict because like we might be presenting an object at a certain distance, let's say like 10 meters, but in fact we are, through the optical system, we are presenting it or rendering it at, for example, 1.45 meters for X4 series. So nevertheless, this still creates the necessary immersion for majority of users, and Varjo high resolution PPD helps with this immersion. But we know that some users are more sensitive to this. How does it impact the medical side of things? I do not know, like in depth, but I'm sure that more and more publications and studies will give light to this question.
I maybe can add a tiny bit to our side and how we deal with this problem, as it's a really relevant question about how does Virgin's accommodation conflict influences measurements like this. And we really try in our examination to isolate all these effects with a correct stimulus design. And this involves like a lot of visual science and neuroscience we are giving in there. So we are trying to have objects at the clearly far away distance, so we will never have a Virgin's conflict, which will then cause the accommodation response, which in turn will then lead to an increase of the pupil size.
This is an awesome panel because I'm learning so much at the same time around our eye tracking. Really exciting stuff. We have a question kind of around the accuracy. Can you achieve kilohertz eye tracking and get sufficiently accurate details to extract pupil region of human eye necessary to calculate the pupil region, blink rate, and pupil trail? I guess that would be on our side first.
So for 1 kilohertz eye tracking, the common imaging cameras might be not enough. So currently researchers and manufacturers are looking into new technology which might be event cameras. So with these cameras it might be possible to get to this frame rate, or like frame rate, not the real frame rate, but rate of events in a compact VR headset design. Otherwise, it's difficult to achieve the necessary compute with such a fast camera as a 1 kilohertz camera in a very compact design, and also deal with power consumption and all other aspects of having such a camera in eye tracker. But indeed, we know and learn more and more from all the research studies that frame rate matters. So in many use cases where eye tracking is applied.
Perfect, thanks. This is one that I was thinking about myself. How do patients feel about wearing headsets? What's the feedback if you put a headset onto somebody who's never been wearing a VR headset in the past?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words about that. So we did even a study on that at the Kantonalspital in Lucerne, so in the center of Switzerland, where they looked at how well is a VR headset accepted by patients. And I mean, if we think about patients, no, we don't have the average 20, 30 years old healthy person with all cognitive full abilities being present, but we have also very old people, we have kids, etc. And the results there were incredibly good. So we put a lot of effort on our side to design the visual scenes in a way that people don't get nausea or like this accommodation versions conflict that can lead to difficulties in people. But also, I mean, the headset itself, the form factor, putting it on the head, positioning it right so the eye tracker works at its full capacity, that has been, that works super well. So it's really easy also in a medical, clinical setting to use a headset for diagnostic purposes with a whole different range of patients, not just kind of the ones you typically don't see at the hospital.
I'd imagine it's a bit of a talking point the first time as well. It's like, oh, this is exciting and different. How about, there's some points around the uncertainty / basically ensuring that the information is reliable. How do you make sure that you're not feeding false data to clinicians? What are the processes there?
I think you already mentioned one of the most important keywords for this, uncertainty. In all our algorithms and the presentation, we really put high emphasis on reporting or uncertainty in the calculation. And then on the other hand, it's also, we are having some plausibility checks to really see like, hey, is this in a physiological range even possible in a diseased range, and what are the ranges of change and everything. And then when we detect that something is really not possible to report, then we will block out these signals. But the most important part is we are super transparent about the uncertainties in all the values we are reporting.
And I think that's important when you deal with eye tracking in the medical, but I guess in all contexts, no? Because I mean, eye tracking data is always messy or noisy to a certain degree. I mean, the one we get from Varjo, that's the best that is out there from our perspective, but still there is noise now, and there's a variance also. Some eyes, they can get tracked better, other eyes are harder to track, etc. So to be able to quantify this noise and the uncertainty that comes with it, that's super important for us, because at the end of the day, as Dominic pointed out, we need to say to the clinician, look, that's how sure we are about the biomarkers that tell something about the brain health. How sure are we that we are providing you with the right number there?
Alexi, you would know this on that topic. What are the trickiest eyes? What are the edge cases where eye tracking could start to break down?
He's seen many eyes.
You've seen a lot of eyes in your years.
Well, first of all, I think it's very challenging to track the eyes with the eyewear, with eyeglasses especially. So the problem is that we have an eye tracker working in infrared light spectrum, right? So 850 nanometers. And like XR4 optics, everything is optimized for eye tracker, but then the user might wear eyeglasses that have a very common like coating for eyeglasses that doesn't like have any anti-reflection for infrared, because this is the mainstream. People's eyeglasses are designed for visual light, not infrared. So we are getting unwanted reflections and like some noise into the image, and we deal with that with very like intelligent noise filters and algorithms that are using all of the basically available information we can get from the image and calibration of the headset to deal with this situation. So I would say that the support for eyeglasses is perhaps the most like challenging in the development for Varjo headsets. But then when it comes to eye shapes and like in the infrared spectrum, we might have some challenges with darker eyes, like black eyes and black iris, because basically pupil is black, and then if the iris is black also, like then you need to still find the edge, right, where your pupil is separated from the iris in the segmentation pipeline, in the image processing pipeline. So yeah, we have worked on that and did intensive like data collections to deal with all of these variations that we encounter. Yeah, of course, like you can always spoil the eye tracking a bit by just squinting the eyes and like hiding your eye features from the eye tracker. So yeah, for best experience, you need to have your eyes open in VR.
Yeah, I want to add that we think that Varjo does a really good job when all these things Alexi mentioned it. And for us working with patients, that means we are having people more than 80 years old with Parkinsonian diseases, and there it's really the problem, they don't have the eyes open. Mm-hmm. And they really have droppy eyelids and everything, and I think there it's just, we are at the physical limit of what you can do with the amount of information present.
And that's where the uncertainty comes in, right? So all of that ties together. All right, I have one around eye movements, such as fixation, saccades, microsaccades, and smooth pursuit are significant in understanding mental health and cognitive functioning. Are you looking into getting sensor performance and functionality for such use case?
I I think that's a question towards me, and we are currently not actively developing these use cases of cognitive functioning as it's outside of our main focus. But in the talk I had together with Patrick, it was really to show that we would be more too open to collaborate and bring our medical and knowledge into other application scenarios, such as simulation, where we could imagine to make an impact.
I think this also, I mean, you can roughly know, that's a bit a naive perspective, but distinguish between kind of the core neurological wiring, like how the eyes react to, I don't know, a stimuli that moves very fast, or to light, how do the pupils react now? And there the neurological wiring is very, very well known. So how the information goes from the eyes through the different nerves and brain regions, how it's processed, how then it goes back to actually adapt the pupil or the gaze position of the eyes. So we are on super solid ground there. When it comes to topics like cognition, more psychiatric disorders, I mean, there are a lot of higher level brain regions involved. Often it gets fuzzier, more difficult, and what we strongly believe in is actually starting at the layer, so to say, in the brain, that you really know what's going on, developing the relevant markers there, and using then those markers, developing with kind of this wiring that is well known, to also assess the relevant topics in other brain regions and higher brain regions. I think that's the way to go.
Sounds like quite a solid approach. It looks like we're wrapping up here. Maybe the call out for everybody there listening in, having different ideas of how to potentially leverage this kind of technology. I'm sure we're all very happy if you reach out to us, whether it's on the Varjo side related to using our eye tracking for other purposes. I'm sure also for MachineMD looking into how your insights could be leveraged in different applications. Please find us and reach out and ask those questions or throw out your ideas, and there are obviously experts at your beck and call here to then figure out what the best approach would be, or how we could tackle that. Any parting thoughts from your side? Obviously MachineMD.com would be the place to reach out and find you. Any other last thoughts or questions from anybody on the panel?
Well, I'd like to thank you for hosting us for this webinar. It was a pleasure. It's good to be back here in Helsinki. We've been here, I don't know, like 2 years ago the last time, or 1 year maybe. So a pleasure to be here, and let's see.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for coming. Thank you everybody for joining, and please do reach out if you have any follow-up thoughts. With that, thank you and see you in the next Varjo Live.